Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, and today I'm very excited to dig a little bit deeper into my computer and big box PC game collection. The goal today is to hopefully introduce you to some computer games that you probably didn't know existed. These are some pretty uncommon games, and especially if you were a console gamer, you might be surprised that some of these games came out on computers, and even if you had a computer like me, maybe you didn't know about them either, so this could be a really fun video. Let's take a look. The first game I want to show you is Homey the Clown, and of course this is based on a popular skit on the TV show In Living Color. And it's funny because I wanted to show this because my buddy Reggie came over one day. He's looking through my computer game collection. He's like, "What? What is this?" He was very interested in this, and so I was like, okay, I need to talk about this in one of my videos. In this game, you survive the rough and tumble streets of New York City dressed as that famous clown. Now, this game plays like an adventure game. However, it's extremely frustrating because at every turn, you get beat up. Everyone wants to take you out in this game. It's hilarious. And, you know, initially there's like nothing you can do about it. So you're definitely going to need some patience for this game because basically you end up in the hospital room time and time again, having to restart to kind of try to figure out what's going on here and what you're supposed to do. Now, I say that it's hilarious, but, you know, you can probably hear it in my voice, but honestly, it's also extremely frustrating too. It's kind of funny because at one point, this game right here was rated as one of the worst PC games ever made. And if you play this, you will definitely see why. Also, the music is just grating and annoying too. So, obviously this is not a good game, but I wanted to talk about it because not a lot of people knew that it existed. And honestly, it's worth a laugh if you're a fan of the show. Here's one not a lot of people know about. That is Revenge of Defender. So this was released in 1988 by Logotron. However, it was released under a different name. It was called StarRay in the UK. And then when it was brought over to the US, they called this game Revenge of Defender. Now it's funny because you flip this over and you might be thinking, hey, there's an arcade machine on the back of it. Well, don't let that fool you because this game never came out in arcades. Instead, it was solely created for the Commodore 64, the Amiga, the Atari ST home computers. And you're seeing the footage right here, and right off the bat, you can see that it has that classic 2D horizontal shooting gameplay that you love from the original Defender that you played in arcades. But obviously the backgrounds are way more colorful and detailed and designed specifically for this version. This is actually a really cool game. So if you happen to have one of those older computer systems at home and you love Defender, you may not have heard of this one and you need to check it out. Here's a game that not a lot of people have heard of. It is called Beatle Quest. And this was released in the 80s by Gary Marsh and Number 9 Software. And as you can see by this awesome cover here, it's an adventure game based on Beatles lyrics and music. And I guess the developer of this game was a professor in college, and he had a course that he taught on the Beatles. He also wrote some books and articles about his favorite band. What's wild about this game is that it takes place really far in the future. You are a astronaut, I guess, and basically you're just bored on this space station and you discover this ancient music called the Beatles. And then in the game, you start to explore who and what these musicians from the past were. And essentially you travel through time based on their songs. And as you see right here, it's a, classic text adventure. It's completely unlicensed. That's the thing about this game. And they only made, supposedly 500 copies. So I happen to have one of them right here. And that was before he got a cease and desist from Ringo Starr. Yeah, you get to brag about that. That's pretty cool, actually. Having played this game, I wouldn't call it a great adventure game. It can be very trial and error trying to figure out what you're supposed to do in this, but If you like the Beatles like I do, it is definitely unique, and again, a game that most people had no idea even existed. All right, moving on to something a bit newer. This is Star Trek BORG, and this is a Star Trek game that I don't think a lot of people have heard of before. This one's a little bit different because it's almost 100% a full motion video game, and it's all from the first person perspective. In this game, you play as a Starfleet cadet whose father recently died in battle. However, the Borg are now back and attacking Starfleet again, and that's when Q shows up and he gives you the offer to go back and change time and history and potentially save your father. There's a lot of things that are actually pretty cool about this game. The first one being is that it features over 120 minutes of all original Star Trek footage shot specifically for this game at Paramount Studios. It's also directed by Jim Conway, who directed numerous Star Trek episodes for television, as well as written by Hilary Bader, who also worked on a bunch of TV shows. She was the writer for a bunch of episodes on there. And, plus it's just cool to see all these real sets from the TV shows, but from this first-person perspective. It's awesome. The gameplay, however, is kind of limited. It actually reminds me of some of those Laserdisc arcade games from the 80s, like, Space Ace or Dragon's Lair, where you're mostly watching a movie and then every once in a while it will pause and then give you the option to make a choice to kind of move the story along. So it's not really the most interactive thing, but it's definitely a forgotten Star Trek game, and one that fans of the TV show should probably try to find a copy of, because again, it's all original and it's really based in that universe. You can tell that they put a lot of time and effort into it. And the good thing is you can finish it in about, I would say, maybe an hour and a half or so, about the length of a movie. Here is Jaws. This version right here was released in 1989 by a publisher called Box Office. Now, there are multiple Jaws games, both released on computers as well as consoles. Probably the one a lot of people are familiar with is the Jaws game that came out on the original Nintendo. However, this computer game is not that. This one actually plays more like a strategy game or an adventure game, but then has arcade elements. And like the movie, you play as a captain of a fishing ship with the goal of hunting down the shark Jaws. And you start in Maine, and then you have to get supplies like a crew, you have to get some food and some fuel and weapons and stuff like that. And then you hop in your boat and you can travel to various ports throughout North America and try to hunt down that legendary shark. And like I said, there are a bunch of different versions of Jaws out there, even on computers. And this one right here, I believe only got released on the Commodore 64, MS-DOS, and Apple II. Here is Rendezvous with Rama. This was released back in 1984. And, you guys probably know this, but it's based on a classic sci-fi novel by Arthur C. Clarke. And I have to tell you that I loved this book as a kid. I devoured it. It was so interesting. And what's cool about it is that this is actually the first game that Arthur C. Clarke collaborated with, as he wanted to make sure that this game captured the essence of his novel. And you guys are looking at the footage here, and yeah, it's pretty dated by today's standards, but you definitely can feel the DNA of that story here. And obviously this is an old school text adventure, but I don't know, man. I think there's a certain charm to these kind of games, especially if you like to read, right? I still can get into these and enjoy them. So, I used to play a ton of these as a kid, especially from companies like Infocom. And it's cool to see that there's a lot of these other ones out there too. One nice feature of this game is that you can turn off the graphics if you want to speed the game up. Now, that's not really necessary today because typically you can activate a warp mode on emulators. But if you wanted to relive this original experience on actual hardware, that's a nice option. Here is Psycho, and what's interesting about this game that was released in 1988 is that it technically has two names. It has Psycho, and then it was also called Psycho Arcade Quest, so just be aware if you're looking for this online. I have the Commodore 64 version here, but there is a Amiga version as well if you want to get a little bit better graphics. And, you know, obviously I don't have to tell you, but this is based on a classic Alfred Hitchcock suspense thriller that millions of people have seen throughout the decades. And here is the game. Most people had no idea that this even existed. So what's going on here? Well, you were called to the Bates Motel to try to find some jewels that went missing that may or may not be found at this creepy old motel. And when you arrive, it's eerily empty. But soon you find that there's definitely some weirdness happening, and you're going to need to explore all the different rooms of this motel, and also occasionally try to defend yourself from things that might want to hurt you, like ghosts for some reason. I didn't see that coming. As you can see by this footage, it plays like a traditional adventure game, and I would say it's all right. You know, it's nothing really great to write home about. I think it's got some decent graphics, and it's pretty fun to explore. But I wouldn't call it amazing or anything. But if you like the movie and you've never heard of this, you're looking for something new to play, check it out. Next up is Conan. So this was released in 1984 by Datasoft. Now, I don't have to tell you, but Conan was really popular in the 1980s because the movie was awesome at the time. I loved it. And it got a bunch of licensed computer releases, including this one here for the Commodore 64, the Apple II, the Atari 8-bit, the MSX, and so much more. But I suspect that many of you probably played the console NES version, but that game looks and plays completely different than this actually, and was made by a different developer and publisher. This definitely looks and feels like a computer action game through and through. In the game, you play as Conan the Barbarian, and you platform and fight your way through a castle to defeat the evil Volta. And along the way, you're going to be battling some bats, some giant ants, some floating deadly eyeball things, some scorpions, plus there's spike pits and a ton more. Basically everything's out to kill you. I would say that the platforming and controls are okay. You feel like you can get used to them after a while. I certainly did. But it feels a little stiff at times, and it's easy to kind of get hung up on the environment. That said, I know this version has a lot of fans that grew up with it, and so I wanted to mention it here because, again, I feel like a lot of people only played the Nintendo version. They had no idea that there was a completely different game released way back in the day on computers. And so that, guys, is a look at 8 computer games that you probably didn't know existed. And I have a bunch more of these computer games that I would love to talk about and do videos on. So please like and subscribe, share this video around if you want me to do another video, because yeah, there's going to be some stuff that I know people have probably never seen before, and it's fun to talk about. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.